Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here. And today, this is a tough one actually, because apparently the United States is falling behind its enemies in cyberspace. And this is, I think, something that's near and dear to my heart, given that I've got a lot of colleagues that work in cybersecurity and government infrastructure, and well, many don't now. And this is something that I think is of deep concern. I like to say that cybersecurity is agnostic to politics, but we're not immune from it. And quite frankly, I think we're getting a real abject lesson in this. Now, for the record, I don't care what your political beliefs are. I don't care if you are a super fan of Trump, you absolutely hate the guy, or you're somewhere in between. But quite frankly, defending our national security, especially in cyberspace, not to mention actual warfighting ability, I think is beyond important to the survivability of any nation. And so if the US is falling behind its enemies in cyberspace, that should be of deep concern to anybody. And one thing that quite frankly, Republicans and Democrats have gotten on board with over the years between the first Trump administration, even the Obama administration, the Biden administration, now the second Trump administration, typically is cybersecurity anything. At the end of the Trump administration, for example, almost unanimously, Republicans and Democrats voted for a IoT cybersecurity bill, which was signed into law. I actually interviewed one of the members of Congress that was a co-sponsor on that bill here from the state of Illinois. Excuse me. She was a Democrat, and basically the Republican Will Hurd of Texas, again, jointly sponsoring these kinds of things. And so if the U.S. is falling behind in cyberspace, that's a huge issue. And for the record, this statement is according to former U.S. Cyber Command and National Security Agency head, retired General Paul Nakasone. So let's dive in, because quite frankly, Nakasone knows what he's talking about. And Tim Starks of Cyberscoop had a really good write-up, and we're going to start there. But we're definitely not ending with his article. And as I mentioned before, the United States is falling, quote unquote, increasingly behind its adversaries, when it comes to cybersecurity and cyber warfare. So speaking at basically the DistrictCon cybersecurity conference in Washington, D.C., Nakasone said that, quote, our adversaries are continuing to be able to broaden the spectrum of what they're able to do to us, end quote. And yeah, we have a massive surface area for attack here in the United States. So much infrastructure, so many networks from local governments all the way up to federal, not to mention private corporations. And this is a huge issue. And Nakasone said that incidents like the Chinese government-backed breaches of U.S. telecommunications companies and other critical infrastructure, as well as the steady drumbeat of ransomware attacks against U.S. targets, really illustrate, and I quote, the fact that we're unable to secure our networks, the fact that we're unable to leverage the software that's being provided today, the fact that we have adversaries that continue to maintain this capability, end quote. And yes, I can't disagree with anything that he just said. Now, one example is, and I quote, we are starting to see the beginnings of the bleed from the non-kinetic to kinetic for cyber operations. So essentially, he is referring to the physical damage that we could potentially see. I've talked about, for example, Oldsmar, Florida, where they were introducing lye into the water system that could have killed every man, woman, and child and animal drinking from that water source in the Oldsmar area, which is about 15,000 humans. So this is a huge thing. Nakasone did continue, though, and I quote, what's next is that we're going to see cyber attacks against a series of platforms, being able to actually down platforms with ones and zeros, end quote. And again, he's talking about the physical world, not just shutting off computers. Now, if you didn't know, General Nakasone is also now a board member of OpenAI, maker of ChatGPT, and so he also talked about how artificial intelligence could make cyber offense more potent. Specifically, he mentioned the notion of generative targeting, such as the idea that physical drones could choose their targets powered by artificial intelligence. This is something I've talked about at length, here in various segments throughout the years. And there is obviously good or bad. On the bad side, it's Terminators. On the potentially good side, it means faster response times to threats. But again, human element is the human element. And so Nakasone also said, and I quote, we're starting to challenge this idea of humans in the middle of the loop. And I also offered to you, as we think about artificial intelligence models, think about cyber weaponry. How far are we talking to this idea of being able to create an agent that's going to move through your network, that's going to change based on topology in the network, being able to evade defenses that are there, choosing targets of the future, end quote. And yes, I mean, think about an adaptive artificial intelligence-based virus, for example, that would have the ability to understand the defenses, let's say on a computer, for example, and then take unique measures to evade those defenses. This is why I keep saying cybersecurity is essentially, it's a never-ending thing. We are constantly improving. We are constantly finding new ways to destroy your life and therefore new ways to defend it. This cat and mouse game is non-stop. And you've got a lot of offensive groups, whether they're intelligence, whether they're ransomware gangs, looking for new and sophisticated ways to evade defenses in order to basically ruin your life or possibly society. And so, to continue with this, I think it's important to understand that members of the Trump administration and some members of both parties in Congress, for the record, have called for the United States to get more aggressive with offensive operations in cyberspace. In separate conversations with reporters, Nakasone agreed with those sentiments. And yes, we have been in essentially a war with Russia, China, and several others for years, but we don't consider it that because it's basically been on computers. Well, computers run everything. They're the engine of the economy for the world. This is a huge, huge thing. But here's the thing, and outside of the Cyberscoop article, we are now actually here in the United States in a bit of predicament when it comes to our cyber capabilities. So consider this. Within 48 hours of President Trump being sworn in on January 20th of this year, there was a purge of senior cybersecurity advisors at Homeland Security, basically CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, the U.S. Secret Service, and more. This actually included colleagues of mine. I've been in meetings with some of those senior advisors that were fired. Usually there is a transition between presidential administrations. When Biden came in, he was going to transition in his own advisors. There's a handoff process that basically says, hey, former advisors, this is essentially how we're working. This is how we're operating. And by virtue of it, new advisors come in, or the same advisors just stay because most of them are bipartisan. They don't care who the president is. They don't care what the political party is that's currently running the show. They're there to look at threat. And that's a huge problem that we have. And on top of that initial purge of those senior advisors, and equated to a battlefield where basically the general comes in and pulls a lot of the top commanders from the battlefield and says, let the privates figure it out. That's in part what essentially started to happen. And so we got this news from February 18th, basically from John Sekularitis. I cannot pronounce your last name, John, I apologize, writing for Politico. Because apparently the Trump administration fired roughly 130 employees of CISA late last Friday night on February 14th as part of a broad push to slash the federal workforce. So in other words, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency just lost another 130, yet they're calling for more aggressive offense in cyberspace. So it is now basically expected that another larger round of mass firings is going to happen soon, if it hasn't happened already, because it would have potentially happened on February 18th. I'm still looking into that, but it could happen next week. But we're seeing these purges. Secretary of Defense is now purging basically the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and a whole bunch of others. And so there we go. Now, this is all happening, for the record, focusing on cybersecurity, despite growing concerns that this will continue to cripple CISA's ability to start to continue to thwart hacking threats against the United States. I mean, this is a huge, huge problem. Now, one of the current CISA employees who essentially was talking to the press on the condition of anonymity, because there's a lot of retribution going on, I don't think anybody would deny that, and I quote that employee, "We have literally been told that CISA will experience massive cuts, a massive reorganization." Now, there are, for the record, legitimate reasons and places to cut costs at CISA or any government agency. There's always going to be waste in government. I don't care what the government system is. But the employee continued that the administration appears to be acting without any regard who holds highly specialized national security posts or how easy it would be to replace them. Cybersecurity, like many other fields, is trained very heavily. I mean, think about, you have a doctor, for example, that trains as a general MD, then goes into a specialist. It can be a neurologist or a surgeon or, whatever it is. Cybersecurity is no different. And we have people that are focused on national security infrastructure and essentially trained on that. And that's not easy to replace, so this is a huge issue. Now, two other people familiar with these layoffs also echoed those assessments, with all three of these employees estimating that at least a few hundred additional agency employees are soon to be let go, maybe even them. So A CISA employee also said and also added that those within the agency were caught off guard by the scope of these recent layoffs. Quote, they are just haphazardly cutting people that we need to respond to Russian and Chinese hacks. They don't even know it. No one asked us what these people even do. In other words, there was no forethought to this. They came in essentially with a proverbial flamethrower and got rid of a whole bunch of people that were actively tracking this. And we found out within the first 48 hours that after they had purged a lot of those top advisors, that the Salt Typhoon project, that's the Chinese intelligence that was worming their way through telecommunication systems, was effectively shut down. In other words, we started to lose track of Chinese intelligence in our networks like T-Mobile, Verizon, like those level types of networks. That's a huge problem that we have for cybersecurity. And so while we can all agree, and again, I don't care what side of the political spectrum you're on here in the United States, we can all agree that we need better cybersecurity and a better offensive cyber warfare capability. If we're cutting the people that would actually do that, then what? We're going the opposite direction of where we need to go if we're going to increase that capability, because we can't lose experienced employees. We need to gain more experienced employees. So this is obviously a huge issue coming straight from my industry. And quite frankly, it's concerning. And I just don't know where this is going to go. And again, you could be all for Doge and all this kind of stuff, but right now we are directly hindering our cyber capability. And I think that's something we should all be aware of and need to be alerted to. And quite frankly, if you have the ear of members of Congress, Republican or Democrat, this is something you should be talking to your member of Congress about, or those that you know. So with that, I'll shut up now, but this is a huge, huge issue. And quite frankly, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better, given these upcoming cuts that they are slashing on some of the most critical national security agencies that we have, that quite frankly are keeping us safe, or at least keeping us aware of the threats that we're facing. And that's quite frankly not good at all. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at Nick AESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. Also, Blue Sky and Mastodon. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please, please, please attempt to stay private and informed. Take care.